Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Dawn Armstrong, Vice President for Region 1, and I'm privileged to hold the portfolio of Human Rights and Equity. Beyond Good Intentions, Confronting Racial Discrimination Through Solidarity will be our 2021 Caucus theme. Today's open dialogue webinar, Unveiling the Truth, the Thoughts and Experience of ONA members, is the first in a series of offerings leading up to the Caucus. ONA board members and staff join the conversation in regard to the very serious topic of anti-discrimination, anti-Black discrimination, and anti-Indigenous discrimination with a message from ONA's President, Vicki McKenna, to the members and to all staff from Bev Mather, CEO, stating that ONA will not tolerate any form of racism, discrimination, or intolerance. As a union, it is our core belief that we promote and enhance the equal treatment of all people and that our workplaces are free from discrimination and harassment. As the Vice President with the portfolio of Human Rights and Equity, it was heartening for me to know that ONA stands in solidarity with Black and Indigenous community, allies in Canada, and global advocates, all calling for justice. ONA strongly supports achieving health equity in our system and advocates for the examination of policy through a social determinants of health lens. The intersection of race, income, housing, and other social determinants of health place Black and Indigenous communities at a greater risk. This has become glaringly obvious in the wake of COVID-19 as we see a disproportionate impact on communities with a higher percentage of visitable minorities. The Toronto Board of Health has recognized that anti-Black racism is a public health crisis. ONA's commitment is to work actively with board members, staff, and members at large to take proactive and corrective steps to facilitate more opportunities to name, address, and educate about anti-racism. We started this journey in February by recognizing and celebrating Black History Month in February. We will be offering a number of workshops, events, and articles throughout 2020 and 2021, culminating in our November 2021 caucus. We will be focusing on advancing human rights for nurses and healthcare professionals. It is now my pleasure to introduce our open dialogue panel. Our moderator is Karen Maxwell. Karen joined ONA in 2018 as a labor relation officer servicing on the South team. Prior to joining, Karen was a public health nurse at York Region and served as bargaining unit president. Karen's previous experience also includes planning, implementing, and evaluating various health promotion programs. In the near future, Karen will be transferring to our education team as an educating LRO. Our first panelist, Ingrid Garrett, comes to us from Toronto. She identifies as a Black Vincentian Canadian. With 35 years in the nursing profession, she currently works in oncology. Susan is a hospital care coordinator. She has been nursing for 10 years and in her current role for 6 years. She lives in Owen Sound. Her heritage is as a First Nations Cree woman. Cynthia Mescal resides in Hamilton. She works in stroke rehabilitation and has been nursing for 34 years. She was born in Great Britain and raised by 2 parents who were born on the island of Barbados. Lastly is our youngest member. Today, Tola has been nursing for 4 years and works in ICU. She lives in Scarborough and is active in her community as an Ethiopian Canadian woman. Karen, the panel is yours.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, and welcome our panelists. We are truly in interesting times. This is a time where racial issues have again been brought to the forefront of the news. The world witnessed the tragic deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery early this year in the United States. But here at home, we know of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, an Indigenous Black Canadian woman who died here in Toronto after an interaction with the police in May. We've also heard of Chantel Moore and Rodney Levi, who were both members of First Nation communities here in Canada and died after police interactions just this past June. These are emotionally heavy times. I want to know, how are each of you doing? How are you coping? Cynthia?
Well,
At times I'm angry, but more often than not, I'm sad that in 2020, Black and Indigenous people still have to fight for the rights that people take for granted every single day. I think that I'm coping. I speak a lot to my sister Cheryl when I need to get things off my chest. I also have a core group of friends that I discuss things with. And when everything else fails, there's days that I just have to turn off the news and get myself away from all the negativity in order to maintain my peace of mind and my own sanity.
Yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. Ingrid, how are you doing? How are you coping?
Well, it depends on the day. Some days, I'm glad that what's happening is happening, because for years we've been saying that there's a disparity in how we were being treated. And, you see the news where black guys are killed, and they're saying they're innocent. And the automatic response would be, they must have done something, bad to have that happen. But now with the advent of cell phones, people are taking pictures and we're actually seeing live what's happening. And it can be overwhelming, because for years we've been saying, we've been screaming, this is wrong, this is injustice, and it's like screaming underwater and not being heard. And all of a sudden now, with the advent of video, it's like our voices are finally being heard, and it's exhilarating in one sense, but it's overwhelming in another sense, because with all this movement worldwide, it sort of brings back memories of days and things that's happened in the past that went unaddressed. So sometimes I just need to get away. I need to shut down and shut it all off, to just go inside and just take it in and sort it out in my own head, and then come back out again. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's what mixed feelings.
It's a powerful, powerful description of you feeling, as a people feeling that we're underground, we're underwater, we're screaming and we're not being heard. But this is a time where you feel like the voices are finally being heard. But that comes at a cost, is what it sounds like. Susan, can you tell me, how are you doing? How are you coping?
For myself, I find that we have so much access to social media, so it really doesn't matter what you do. So turning on the radio, turning on your computer, turning on your TV, it's just, racism is just so in your face, because that's what's reported on. And sometimes it's very, very overwhelming. And it really, for me, my feelings are, I can't believe people are treating each other this way. And I can't believe that it's okay in somebody else's eyes. And that plays big on my mental health. I myself am just moving through some new, how do I say it? Some new feelings and everything, that it makes it hard to understand what's happening out in the public. So I tend to shut myself down. I tend to not access those news reports and keep myself safe mentally. So I'm able to do and function as a mother and function as a nurse and do my job. So.
Thank you for that. Today, I'd like to know, how are you doing? How are you coping through all this?
Initially, I was having a hard time, especially since it happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, at the start of it, with the lockdown and working in ICU. We were a hot zone in our hospital for COVID-19 positive patients, and so I was exhausted at work. Every time I went in, I just felt extremely exhausted by the time I came out. And then when I came home, I was watching like mentally taxing news, and it was taking a toll on my overall health. And I had to build borders and boundaries for how much content I should be exposed to or take in every day, especially after work. And I had a really hard time. I was exhausted. And but now I'm doing much better. Being involved in projects and discussions has helped me find a way of release of that stress and anxiety. And I'm doing much better now.
That's great to hear. You can definitely hear from each one of you that this is a trying time, and we're all trying to cope in our various ways. One of the things we know is that we all bring different experiences with us throughout our daily journeys. Many of these experiences are recent, and many of them are from quite a young age. Can each one of you tell me, what was your first experience with racism? Ingrid?
At the time, I didn't realize it was racism until later on. But when we were kids, when we first came to Canada, we were in grade school, and we were the only Black family in the neighborhood. We were surrounded at recess, my sister and I, by a group of white kids, girls, chanting nigger, 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 nigger. But we didn't know what it meant. We just knew it wasn't nice. And it happened enough time that we went to my mom. We told my mom eventually, and she said, well, go to the principal's office and tell them. Mind you, there was a teacher in the field, like in the area, but nothing was ever done. It wasn't addressed there then. So the principal actually kept us in at recess. We were supposed to report to the office at recess and sit outside the office like we did something wrong. But as a kid, you don't realize that it was wrong. It was after I got older that I realized how bad that was. It wasn't fair at all. And another thing that I thought of was constantly being called liver lips. And I didn't know what was wrong with my lips, but I just knew that there must be something wrong with my lips if they're calling me liver lips. And again, you don't know why these things are, but you just sort of internalize it and figure there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So those are two of the things that, I mean, you have lots of experiences, but those are two of the things that really stick out for me.
Wow. And you said in grade school, so young.
Yeah.
So young. Sade, what was your first experience with racism?
My first experience was also pretty young. I was in elementary school. I was in 5th grade. And I had these 2 classmates that were best friends. They were 2 girls, one was Black, one was white. And they were like inseparable. And then one day during recess, the white girl had hurt herself and like scraped her leg or knee. And so I was helping her in the washroom getting cleaned up. And I was just wondering, like, why was I in there helping her when she had a best friend? Like, I wasn't her best friend. So I asked her, like, why isn't your best friend helping you? And she told me that it's because her mom had told her she's not allowed to have Black friends or hang out with Black friends. And that's why her and her best friend weren't talking.
Wow. Wow. Again, another experience that so young. And I'm sure at the time, the understanding you had wasn't even close to what you recognize right now.
It went over my head. I did not understand it at that moment. It wasn't until I got older I understood what that actually meant.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sade. Cynthia, can you tell me one of your first experiences of racism?
It would have started when we came to Canada and had to register for school. So I was in grade 1. I was 6 years old, and my parents went to the school to register us. And the principal told my parents that children like us usually had to be put back in grade in order to be successful, basically to keep up with the work. And my dad said, that's not happening. So then the principal insisted then that we be tested. So my siblings and I had to be tested. And lo and behold, not only did we pass those grades, we shattered those tests, but we shattered them. And we actually tested higher than our grade level. So then the principal was saying, well, maybe then we should put you in a higher grade. And my dad said, well, no, I don't want my children in a higher grade. I want them in the grade they're supposed to be in for their age. Here they are coming from England, and it's going to be hard enough to assimilate to a different country and a different school. And so I just want them where they're supposed to be. So I was put in grade 1. There was only one other black girl in my class. And sometime throughout that year, we had these paper dolls that we always played with. All the kids had them. And there's a group of boys, and they drew really nasty things on the dolls, genitals, and just not very nice. And the teacher, she pulled myself and the only other black student aside, just the two of us, and had the dolls in her hand and said, basically told us off for drawing on the dolls and said, this is something that people like you would do. It wasn't us, of course, but it's funny because to this day, I can remember that incident, and I will never forget that teacher's name.
Wow. Such vivid memories that you're going to be carrying with you for the rest of your life, and from such a young age as well. Susan, can you tell me, what was your first experience with racism?
For me, again, it's at a younger age. They moved, and of course, starting in a new school and such. My previous grades were quite good, A's and B's. So into grade 5 I go and do my school year, and was never ever told anything bad at the time when I was going through school. But came report card time. My mom saw my report card, called and made an appointment for a parent-teacher meeting, and me thinking nothing of it, as there was no real concern, went in with my mom. I was just standing there beside her. Teacher came over and said, I see you're here. Where's your mom? I'd like to meet her. And I kind of looked at the teacher kind of, okay. And I pointed to my right-hand side and said, here's my mom. At that time, the teacher kind of looked astounded. Her facial features expressed that, because my mom actually is white, as I am an adoptive child. And actually, to tell you the truth, I'm part of the 60 scoop. So I was taken from my biological family and placed in a white family by CAS many, many years ago. I didn't know that until actually 2 years ago. But other than that, my mom had said to the teacher, I see you've marked my daughter's report card with C's and D's. I think you need to rethink this report card, and I want it done again. The next report card came out, and I was nothing but A's and B's. So I think that was the first time I actually really noticed that I was different. Other than that, I've never been made feel any different at all. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. Thank you for each one of you for sharing these stories that are so hurtful, and stories and experiences that you've had to bear for so long because they happened at such an early age. One of the things that many of us can attest to is the fact that racism is not always overt. In many of the stories that you've already shared, it has been, but it can also be very insidious and subtle in its appearance. Cynthia, as a nurse who's been practicing for the past 34 years, how have you experienced microaggressions and racism in the workplace?
Unfortunately, there have been a lot, way too many. But one of the most recent things that have happened recently, in the last couple of weeks, was my employer had these pins made to celebrate the staff coming to work on a regular basis and doing such hard work during the pandemic. So at our morning huddle, it's a meeting where we have the nursing team and the rest of the health discipline team and the manager. And we talk about issues for the day, any things for the patients they need to know, that sort of thing. And so the manager said, oh, I've got these pins that are from the hospital to say thank you for being here during the pandemic. And so the pins are just a face with a mask on to represent, of course, what we're being masked during the pandemic. So she was going to hand them out. So I went over to get mine, and she gave me sort of this funny kind of look. And I was like, hey, what's that about? And then she handed me the pin. And I realized why she had that funny look, because all of the faces on the pin were white. So I took a deep breath and I said, you've got to be kidding me. And one of my other colleagues who is non-white was like, can't believe this is happening. They're handing these pins out. So I took the pen, and I took a brown marker and I colored the face in. And I spoke to lots of people about it. And some people were supportive, and some people said, well, what's the big deal? It's just a pin. I said, okay, then what if all these pins came with brown faces? Well, they didn't like that idea. And I said, now you see what I'm talking about. Within the last, I think, probably 5 days, the hospital has posted on social media that they have pins that are of different colored faces. So I guess they've gotten, they got the picture. The other thing, I was a charge nurse for a lot of years. And as the charge nurse, you're the person that the families contact if there's issues or they just want to know what's going on with their family member. Things were great when I spoke to people over the phone, but when they met me in person, they would say things like, I need to speak to the charge nurse. And I'd say, I am the charge nurse. And they'd say, well, you can't be the charge nurse. And I'm like, well, yeah, I am. They would also say things like, your voice doesn't match how you look. We didn't expect you to look like this. And I knew exactly what they said, what they meant. You know, there's days when I'm pushing the medication cart or, you know, doing something, getting ready to do something for a patient, addressing, I've got supplies in my hands or what have you. And they will make comments about me being, you know, this needs to be done. And, you know, you're the housekeeper. I said, no, I'm not. I'm the nurse. But I find that when this happens, I really have to take a deep breath, count to 20 or 30, because counting to 10 is not going to do it. And I always try to maintain that professional behavior.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Ingrid, you've been a bargaining unit president for the past 12 years, and you've worked closely with employers in your union capacity. How do you think ONA as a union has helped to address these issues?
Well, I must give credit to ONA for having the Human Rights and Equity Caucuses where we go off and discuss amongst ourselves the visible minorities and the different groups discuss among themselves the issues. But I think ONA needs to take it one step further and you know, apply education, because there is no doubt there's unconscious bias that results in the adverse outcomes for people, for minorities and people of color. And unless those unconscious bias are addressed or actually exposed, addressed, called what it is, and there's some sort of education to make people aware and to just basically to address it, it won't change. And I think that's the direction ONA needs to go. And I'm happy to hear that there are plans to address these issues that profoundly affect people in the black community and racialized communities, because the outcomes for them is not as good as the general public. And there's a direct correlation between the interaction of caregiver and patient, right? That results in a positive outcome or a negative outcome. So ONA has a lot of work to do, in my opinion, when it comes to dealing with this issue. And it sounds like we're working towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's these subconscious and unconscious biases that feed into the systemic inequalities that we find ourselves in daily. We know that Black and Indigenous peoples face greater barriers to healthcare access and subsequently face poorer outcomes as a group. Susan, as a healthcare professional, please share with us any barriers you may have witnessed with your patients, or even if you've experienced these barriers yourself as a patient.
First off, I'd like to say there are many experiences, but if you're just looking for a couple, then I would have to say, first of all, my personal experience. I was extremely ill for a couple of days, and my husband decided I needed to be seen in ER, in the emergency department. So he took me to the hospital. I was not dressed appropriately, so I was in track pants, a t-shirt. My hair was a horrible mess, and I looked awful. I was triaged, and during my triage, I had seen that they had marked me as non-urgent because they circle the document and put it in line for emergent patients to be seen. Went back to the chair, and my husband overheard one of the nurses that came to the triage area from the back stating which patient would be seen next. And she said, "No, don't worry about her," which was my chart. She's just recovering from a hangover. So I waited there for about 2 to 3 hours, and then I was seen into the back. I waited there another 2 hours, and I was awful. Like, it was horrible. Waited there another 2 hours because I was considered non-urgent. So when the doctor came in to see me, he did one test, and he said, "Why is she waiting?" Ordered IV antibiotics stat, ordered IV fluids stat, ordered a CT stat. I was put up into ICU because I was in renal failure. So that was a little bit emotional, and recalling that as right now at this time. So that's very unfortunate, and I would hate for anybody else to experience that that kind of racism. The other one has to do with my professional workplace. I'm actually a hospital discharge planner, so I do a lot of next step planning for patients in our hospital. And our hospital is actually based near First Nations Reserve. And we often have patients from there, and because they're ill and or because they have physically declined. So in that, sometimes there's programs that we can have our patients move to gather strength and to improve their mobility and ensure that they're safe before they return home. So that was recommended for a patient that I was working with, and he was Indigenous. The one comment that came from a nursing professional was, "Why are we doing that? Because he will just return home and start drinking again and be in the hospital again." I said, at that point, I said, everyone deserves an opportunity for healthcare. And so we made that plan. He went and attended this program, and I have not seen him for about 3 to 4 years since then. So it was successful, and that's what the programs do for every patient. So
what scary, sad, unfortunate experiences you've just told. And I'm happy to know that you're doing well now, and as you said, you haven't seen that patient in a number of years. So my hope for him is that he's doing well. However, just to be subjected to these same biases that Ingrid spoke of earlier, that are in our subconscious and in our unconscious, it's scary. It's truly scary. I'm just wondering, as we speak with our friends and families about this subject, and the discussion sometimes tends to come up, whether or not things are better or worse. Today, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this? Like, what makes this time we find ourselves in different from times before, if at all?
Well, when people talk about times are better now, it actually makes me a little angry. It ticks me off, because from how I take that is what they think, what that person thinks is because it isn't law to have for slavery. It is no longer law for residential schools. That those practices have not affected these communities, any racialized communities anymore. And so it means, to me, it tells me that people don't realize how much of an impact these practices still have on racialized communities, especially how it's contributed to systemic racism and the way we live now. And so it's a disregard, and it sort of feels like people make it, by saying that it's not as prevalent now, is like saying racism and people's experiences are not as serious of an issue to discuss anymore. And so I wouldn't say it's better or worse. It's a different form now. And so yeah, that's how I take it as.
Mm-hmm. With all that we've all shared so far, there's so much pain and so much hurt that's being carried by us as a people, as a human race. You know, trauma and experience, or trauma and pain have been experienced by so many for so long. And moving forward from this includes healing on many fronts. What does racial or cultural healing look like for each one of you? Cynthia?
Well, for me, racial and cultural healing, in a nutshell, would be the absence of aggression towards people who are non-white. Discrimination would be a thing of the past, and people truly would be judged on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation. Police and others would stop their racial profiling, and people of all colors could live wherever they chose to live. I think that our Canadian society needs to embrace the cultures from the Caribbean, from Asia, and from Africa, and not just those from European nations. People of color need to stop being told that they need to assimilate and forget about where they came from and forget about their culture and just fit into Canadian society. I think also that properties that were stolen from people in the past need to be returned to the rightful owners, and that recognition would be given to those people who were previously denied it. I know that's probably a lot of pie in the sky, and maybe I'm looking through rose-colored glasses, but that's what I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Ingrid, what does cultural healing and racial healing look like for you?
So I would mirror or echo what Cynthia said, but I would go a little bit further. Cultural healing to me would mean that we live in a society where you are rewarded for the job you do, not based on who you are, who is doing the job. You would be promoted, and you'd be able to go to school wherever you choose to go to school without barriers. And I know for that to happen, we have to start with, first of all, telling history as it really is, and not what the Europeans want it to be, excluding facts and that would shed a different light on the Indigenous people, for example, that would recognize the contributions of Blacks in our society, because, you know, I didn't know that the filament that made the light bulb last was created by a Black man. I didn't know that the water gun, I saw today a child playing with a water gun. It was invented by a black man. He had to go to court to get the rights, and from Hasbro to his own invention. And I think until we learn about the real history, about the contributions people have made, the fact that we all have something to contribute to a society. It doesn't all have to be the same, a European-based society. We don't all have to make ourselves look European. There's beauty in every race. Until we come to that realization, until these stigmas are removed, and it's going to take a long time. And I agree with Cynthia. It sounds like pie in the sky, but it's achievable. We start with governments. We start with laws that end with companies that say we will not tolerate unconscious bias. We will not tolerate systemic racism, and have policies and do whatever it takes to make sure that this isn't perpetuated. Now there's a real chance now for people to do, for businesses and for governments to make laws to make sure that this, going forward, things keep going forward, and that we just don't do things now to make it look good now, and then we fall back into our old behaviors. That is not recognizing the value in anyone other than whites. So to me, that's what cultural healing is just that maybe an acceptance of people as they are, and promoting a history that's real and not fiction. Those things will start to create healing.
Thank you. Today, how do you see cultural healing or racial healing?
Well, for me, I'm raised in an immigrant family, so I was raised here in Scarborough, and so in terms of cultural healing, because I was raised in a traditional Ethiopian household, I find that finding support from my friends who are also children of immigrants as well, diaspora, is a huge way of supporting one another, encouraging one another, also empowering one another to continue to have difficult conversations, especially when we have to, especially now during these times where the conversation of how racism and systemic racism is still prevalent in the way we live, it could be exhausting. So having that community support and embracing one another and being able to encourage one another and give each other that energy.
Okay. So I'm hearing so far that there's a cultural shift that needs to happen for that healing, as well as education and the sharing of truth, and then support from within the culture itself. Susan, I'm wondering, how do you see racial healing and cultural healing?
For myself, I think it's very different, just because, like I had mentioned previously, that I am a survivor of the 60s scoop. So I have been brought up in a white world with their beliefs and religions and such. And just recently, I've been confirmed that, yes, I am actually a survivor of the 60s scoop. And now just getting to know my own culture, getting to know my own biological family. So by educating myself and understanding where I come from and understanding my true roots is huge. It's monumental for me. I also think that I'm going to say, I hate saying this word, but by white people understanding different cultures and other cultures, understanding each other, that there will be less aggression towards each other, because then at that point we can see each other as equals. One thing I have learned with my culture is that we do see each other as equal. We don't see the differences, and we just wish everybody wellness within their lives. So we don't see, we actually just see a human in front of us. So.
Those are beautiful words. Thank you. Thank you. Many believe we are witnessing an international civil rights movement, protesting anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism and demanding systemic change. Some believe we're at the cusp of something big. Sade, are we at a tipping point that could result in meaningful and lasting change, or do you worry that momentum will not be sustained?
So I think, unfortunately, whether it's intentional or not, once we all move towards going back to work, returning to our new normal of daily routines, unfortunately, people will have these distractions towards or away from the realities of what's been happening. And what I hope for is, after all these months, especially with the movement of self-educating, self-reflecting, self-awareness, reading, listening to people's experiences, especially Black and Indigenous folks' experiences, I just hope that people don't forget, whether it's months, weeks, years, especially years to come, of what has been taking place. And so when the time comes to vote for people who are advocates for change in policies, in our government, when it comes to holding leadership accountable for their actions and their platforms, I hope people don't forget and know that they also have a part to also voice their concerns, and especially when it comes to voting in a democratic country. So I just hope down the line that people don't forget what we've all been working for all this time, and what they've been also working at, whether it, in whatever form, the last couple of months.
Yeah. Thank you. Organizations around the world have dedicated time to raising awareness for various issues. The World Health Organization has declared 2020 the year of the nurse and the midwife. The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed 2015 to 2024 the decade for people of African descent, with recognition, justice, and development. And we're about to celebrate the International Day of the World's Indigenous People on August 9th. What else can be done to raise cultural awareness? Cynthia?
I think that education is required in order to raise cultural awareness. I think the truth needs to be told. The history of Black and Indigenous people, both in Canada and throughout the world, needs to be part of the school curriculum. I feel that it is as important as reading and writing and mathematics. And it needs to start with children who are just entering the school system. So from as early as kindergarten, because we know that children, when they're younger, they retain more. They just learn easier, and it sets a good foundation. I learned about primarily American history, which is unfortunate growing up in Canada. We did learn some Canadian history, but while I was in school, there was no history of the Indigenous people, no history of the Black people. We learned about Christopher Columbus. We learned about the Pilgrims. But, you know, Black and Indigenous people have done so much for this country. Also, the people of other races, the Japanese, the Chinese, they've made contributions, not to mention the injustices that were suffered in this country. Nelson Mandela, who is someone that I respect, he was imprisoned for 27 years for speaking out. They considered him, they considered what he did was treason. And, you know, even after he was released, he went on to become president in the country that imprisoned him. But instead of coming out and being bitter, he said that we need to preach equality and forgiveness. And one of his most famous quotes, I should say, was that education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. And I firmly believe that. From a nursing standpoint and from an ONA standpoint, I think that having the Human Rights and Equity Caucuses every year is a great thing. I have learned so much about myself, about other people. And I think for myself, it's where I actually got my voice. And I'm hoping that if we continue to have these discussions and we continue to have these caucuses, other people will also find their voice.
Thank you. Thank you. What are your thoughts, Ingrid? How else do you think we can raise cultural awareness?
Well, the only way to raise cultural awareness, like Cynthia said, is through education. And education in the school, starting with the children, like she said, because one of the things that we're taught about history was that Columbus discovered North America. He discovered the New World. Well, he couldn't have discovered anything when there are people here. The fact that they weren't even acknowledged as people tells you a lot. And so we have to stop teaching this kind of history that is unjust and misleading. And kudos to the Quebec government, because they stopped teaching that history, and they're now in the process, and I don't know if they've finished yet. They're now in the process of revising the history texts to include the contributions of all the Indigenous people that helped the white settlers that came here to survive, because they didn't know how to survive these winters. So that's where we have to start. And when it comes to unconscious bias, I think ONA has, and like I said, I applaud them for having the Human Rights and Equity Caucus, but it has to go further, because we can't get past the fact that there's such a disparity in health outcomes in Black and Indigenous and people of color, those populations, that it can't be ignored any longer. It's there, it's real, and the only way we can change that is for the caregivers to be able to recognize when they're being motivated by unconscious bias. We need to know what it looks like. We need to know how to unpack it and unveil it and deal with it. Because that's the only way we're going to have positive outcomes, is for the people who are actually the cause. I hate to say that, but they are. It is the cause, and a lot of it is unconscious. They're not aware that they're doing it. But what we need are people around to say, you know what, maybe this isn't the right decision. Like, why would you do it this way, or why would you make this decision? Are you aware? And just have the conversations and be part of the change and be part of the solution. But I do think education is by far the main need to I'm sorry, I get very emotional when I talk about this. Education is what we need to affect change. And without that, and it has to be real. It must be real. It must address the issues that are real and not sugar-coated. Don't call it something other than it is. Call it what it is, and deal with it as it is. And then we will see change.
Mm-hmm. And no need to apologize for the emotion that brings up. This is an emotional topic that have touched, the lives of so many. And what I'm hearing is that education is very important, but as well as making it real, making it tangible for those that are being educated and becoming more aware when we look at cultural awareness. Susan, what are your thoughts? What else can be done to raise cultural awareness?
I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think that education is what we need to do. And I think
As the other two had said, cultural awareness would be best implemented by education. I also agree that by doing a self-awareness education, in making sure that you're checking in with yourself to ensure that you're not included in the racism that is experienced within workplaces or in personal lives. Because if you're participating in that kind of behavior, then you're contributing to that. So it's very, very important to be self-aware and to be able to do check-ins with yourself to ensure that you're not contributing to it, and or you recognize it, and that way things can change, because if you're not able to see it in yourself, you're not able to implement change.
Thank you. So I'm hearing it's also on a very personal level as well.
Yes.
With this conversation, we hope to begin the steps of change by bringing an awareness of the racism experienced by many. What is your personal hope for the future through this discussion? What do each of you hope to achieve by being a part of such an important conversation? Ingrid?
Well, I've been part of the conversation for a very long time, and I'm finally starting to see changes. I'm part of the Black Legacy Committee that sanctioned by UHN, and we just finished completing a series of policies, anti-racism and anti-systemic racism, and it's when I compare where we started, where they didn't even want to put up a banner, a Black History banner, years ago, about 15 years ago. We weren't allowed to put up the Black History Month banner in the foyer, to now where we're being asked to review videos to make sure that, you know, there is no subconscious, unconscious bias, to make recommendations and things like that. So we're getting there, and it's sort of, I know that we're not there yet, but it's a good feeling to know that you had something to do with that change. You know, before it was falling on deaf ears, but now I guess it's not.
Excellent. Excellent to hear the work that's being done in the workplace. Susan, what do you hope to achieve by being a part of this conversation? Hi, Susan, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So I think my hope is that people are wanting to be better, to be more a positive in this world, to be able to participate with whoever comes to the table, and not be judgmental, not be see themselves as higher or in a different social status or whatever it may be. I'm just hoping that people will start to participate and want to change and want to be involved. That's my hope.
Thank you. Today, what's your hope?
My hope on an ONA level would be for ONA to start collecting demographic data on their members, so we can understand our members better and actually have data to support and say there are barriers for our nurses within the profession. If, for example, Mount Sinai had hired a third party and they created a census, and there is now quantifiable data that Mount Sinai has to work with, Mount Sinai Hospital, sorry, and it shows, it actually quantified that their employees that are visible minorities, there did feel there was systemic racism and barriers for them to achieve more and obtain higher positions in their place of employment. So I think on an ONA level, it would be great if we actually are able to do the same thing for all members, and also maybe even encourage employers to do this type of census collection that Mount Sinai Hospital did. And that's my hope. That's my hope for us.
Thank you, Sade. Cynthia, what do you hope to achieve by being part of this conversation?
Well, my hope for the future would be that the world in which we live and we work would be harmonious. I would hope that we would have equity for all, and that people would step out of their comfort zones and truly look around them and see what's happening and try to do something to make a positive change. More than 50 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. made this statement that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Mm. And I think that that's something that we can never, ever forget.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Those are wise words. And thank you all. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your experiences and your thoughts during this pivotal time we find ourselves. I believe by using our voices to raise awareness of the very real impacts of racism, bigotry, and injustice, that each one of us is positively influencing the outcomes for Black and Indigenous people, as well as human beings as a whole. Thank you for sharing your honest and real lived experiences. Thank you for your passion and your advocacy. Thank you for bringing hope. As human beings, we're all better off because of it. And now I will turn it back to Dawn.
Thank you, Karen. On behalf of myself and the board, I want to wholeheartedly thank yourself, Cynthia, Ingrid, Susan, and Sade for taking the time and sharing your incredible stories. It takes a huge level of bravery and confidence to share such personal stories, especially in such an open way. It's through your stories that we hope you can influence, teach, and inspire others to understand, empathize, and empower. As an organization, ONA strives to be a leader in every way possible, and we want our 68,000 members to advocate and become part of the solution. If we all offer support to one person, stand up for one person, and give voice to one person, then we can all move together forward. If we change our own mind and heart, chances are we can change the heart and minds of others. True change will happen. We are stronger together. Thank you.